Commander Vex 9 had always prided himself on being the galaxy's most accomplished mind reader. 300 successful interrogations, 47 conquered species, and 0 failures on his record. Well, until today. Today was going to be special. Today was going to be his masterpiece. Today he was finally going to crack the mystery of human consciousness. The irony wasn't lost on him that he, a being who could slip through thoughts like water through a sieve, that was about to meet his match in a species that still used primitive chemical rockets to leave their own atmosphere. "Bring in the specimen," Vex commanded, his voice echoing through the sterile white interrogation chamber aboard the Nexus station. His tentacles writhed with anticipation as 2 guards dragged in what appeared to be an ordinary human male. The prisoner looked absolutely unremarkable. Average height, brown hair that stuck up at odd angles, wearing what humans called jeans and a t-shirt that read "I survived Monday." His name, according to the files, was Jake Mitchell, age 32, occupation, software developer from something called Ohio. Nothing special. Nothing threatening, nothing that should make Vex's psychic sensors twitch with unease, but they were twitching. Oh, how they were twitching. So, Vex began, settling his bulk into the interrogation chair that groaned under his weight. "You're the famous human everyone's been talking about." Jake looked up with eyes that seemed far too calm for someone who'd just been abducted by aliens. "Famous? Buddy, I write code for a living. The most exciting thing that happened to me last week was finding a 20% off coupon for pizza." The casual tone made Vex's primary eye twitch. Humans and their strange sense of humor. He'd studied their entertainment broadcasts, trying to understand why they found suffering amusing, but it remained as mysterious as their ability to resist his mental probes. "Your species has been problematic," Vex continued, leaning forward. "Every other intelligent race in the galaxy falls to our psychic abilities within moments. But humans are different. We need to understand why. Maybe it's because we're too stupid to know we should be afraid," Jake suggested with a shrug that seemed genuinely helpful. "I mean, half of us still think the Earth is flat, so clearly we're not operating with full mental capacity here." Vex's tentacles stopped writhing. Was this human mocking him? The audacity was either breathtakingly brave or catastrophically foolish. Probably both, knowing humans. "I'm going to read your mind now," Vex announced, his psychic crown beginning to glow with that familiar purple light that had broken countless alien wills. "I suggest you don't resist. It will only make the process more unpleasant." Jake's response was to yawn. Actually yawn, as if the threat of psychic violation was about as interesting as a weather report. "Look, purple guy, I've got to warn you, my mind isn't exactly a pleasant place to visit. I've got anxiety about deadlines I missed 3 years ago, an encyclopedic knowledge of cat videos, and I still have that song from the cereal commercial stuck in my head from 1994. You sure you want to go in there?" The warning should have been Vex's first clue to abort the mission. Should have been the moment he realized that maybe, just maybe, some doors weren't meant to be opened. But pride is a universal constant, and Vex had built his entire identity around his ability to crack any mind. "I've seen the thoughts of beings who've witnessed the birth and death of stars," Vex said, his voice dripping with confidence that would soon curdle like milk left in the sun. "I think I can handle one primitive human brain." Famous last words, as humans might say. Vex extended his psychic probe, feeling the familiar sensation of consciousness reaching out to touch consciousness. The initial contact was always the same. A gentle brush against the surface thoughts, like dipping a toe in calm water. But Jake's mind wasn't calm water. It wasn't even rough water, it was something else entirely. The first thing that hit Vex was the noise, not sound exactly, but a cacophony of mental activity that seemed to operate on 17 different levels simultaneously. There was the surface chatter, the ongoing internal monologue that went something like, "Is this guy seriously purple? I wonder if he's related to Barney. Oh God, why am I thinking about Barney right now? Great, now I'm going to have that song stuck in my head too. This is worse than the cereal commercial." But underneath that relatively normal stream of consciousness was something that made Vex's psychic probe recoil like it had touched a live wire. Human thoughts weren't organized. They weren't linear. They weren't even logical. They were a twisted maze of connections that defied every law of mental architecture Vex had ever encountered. Jake was simultaneously thinking about quantum physics, wondering if he'd remembered to feed his cat, solving a coding problem, planning what to have for dinner, analyzing the alien's threat level, composing a mental grocery list, and experiencing a vivid flashback to his 7th birthday party where his cousin had thrown cake at the clown. And that was just the beginning. The deeper Vex probed, the stranger it became. Human memory wasn't stored in neat, accessible files like every other species. It was a chaotic web where the smell of coffee could trigger a memory of summer camp, which connected to thoughts about mosquitoes, air, which somehow led to a philosophical debate about the nature of existence, which circled back to wondering why hot dogs came in packages of 10 but buns came in packages of 8. What in the void? Vex muttered, his tentacles beginning to tremble as he tried to navigate the maze of Jake's consciousness. I told you it was weird in here, Jake said cheerfully, somehow maintaining a conversation while Vex was literally inside his head. You should see the filing system I use for childhood memories. It's organized by emotional trauma and indexed by breakfast cereals. That should have been impossible. No being could carry on a coherent conversation while being psychically probed. It required a level of mental compartmentalization that shouldn't exist in nature. But here was Jake, chatting away like they were discussing the weather, while his mind performed what could only be described as cognitive gymnastics that would make a quantum computer weep. Vex pushed deeper, determined to find the core of Jake's consciousness, the central processing unit that every intelligent being possessed. But the deeper he went, the more fragmented everything became. There wasn't one Jake. There were dozens of them, all operating simultaneously. There was responsible Jake, who was currently calculating the financial implications of missing work due to alien abduction. There was anxious Jake, who was convinced this was all an elaborate prank. There was curious Jake, who was genuinely interested in learning about alien technology. There was hungry Jake, who couldn't stop thinking about tacos, and there was sarcastic Jake, who was providing running commentary on the entire situation. "Oh, you found the committee," Jake said, noticing Vex's confusion. "Yeah, that's how we make decisions. We argue with ourselves until someone gives up or we get distracted by something shiny." The committee? Vex had never encountered anything like this. Other species had unified consciousness, singular decision-making entities. Humans apparently ran on some kind of mental democracy where different aspects of personality voted on actions. And the connections kept getting stranger. Jake's mind was filled with references Vex couldn't understand, cultural touchstones that seemed to trigger emotional responses completely disproportionate to their apparent significance. The mention of something called a Rick-roll caused a cascade of amusement mixed with annoyance. A mental image of a cartoon sponge living in a pineapple under the sea triggered nostalgia, so powerful it nearly knocked Vex's probe offline. "How do you function?" Vex demanded, his voice strained as he tried to maintain the psychic connection. "Your thoughts are chaos. Pure, undiluted chaos. Function is a strong word," Jake replied. "I prefer stumbling through life with style. Look, you want to see something really fun? Think about the time I tried to assemble IKEA furniture." Before Vex could protest, Jake's mind supplied a memory so intensely frustrating that it caused Vex's probe to experience what could only be described as psychic whiplash. The memory involved incomprehensible instructions, missing screws, Swedish words that might have been curse words, and a growing sense of existential dread that had nothing to do with furniture and everything to do with the meaninglessness of existence. "Stop," Vex gasped, his tentacles now shaking violently. "I don't understand. How can you hold this level of cognitive dissonance without going insane?" "Who says we're not insane?" Jake asked with disturbing cheer. "We're a species that invented something called pineapple on pizza and then argued about it for decades. We make movies about disasters and call it entertainment. We created social media and act surprised when it makes us miserable. Sanity is overrated. But Vex wasn't listening anymore. He was too busy being pulled deeper into the labyrinth of human consciousness, and what he found there made him wish he'd never left his home planet. Human creativity wasn't just chaotic. It was weaponized chaos. Jake's mind was simultaneously composing a song about alien abduction, designing a new app for rating breakfast cereals, and crafting an elaborate fantasy where he was a ninja accountant who fought crime with spreadsheets. And the emotions. Sweet cosmic void. The emotions. Humans didn't just feel things. They felt everything. All at once, in contradictory combinations that should have caused immediate psychological collapse. Jake was currently experiencing curiosity, terror, amusement, annoyance, hunger, and a strange sort of pride in his species' collective weirdness. "Please," Vex whimpered. His psychic probe trapped in a loop where Jake was simultaneously trying to remember the lyrics to a song while solving a mathematical equation, while planning his escape, while wondering if aliens had Netflix. "Make it stop." "Can't do that, buddy," Jake said, his mental voice echoing from 17 different directions at once. "This is just Tuesday for us. Wait until you see what happens when we're actually trying to be creative." And that's when Jake did something that no other being in the galaxy had ever done during a psychic probe. He started actively thinking at Vex, not communicating, not responding, but deliberately generating the most chaotic, random, contradictory thoughts he could manage. The assault was immediate and overwhelming. Jake's mind became a fire hose of consciousness, blasting Vex with everything from childhood lullabies to advanced calculus to deeply personal fears about whether anyone actually liked him to elaborate theories about why socks disappeared in the dryer. Vex's tentacles began to spasm as his probe was caught in a mental tornado that included Jake's opinions on every movie he'd ever seen, his complete relationship history, and his theories about quantum mechanics based entirely on science fiction, and a vivid recreation of every embarrassing moment from middle school. "Stop," Vex pleaded, but Jake was just getting started. "Oh, you want to see something really special?" Jake's mental voice had taken on a quality that could only be described as aggressively helpful. "Let me show you the time I spent 3 hours trying to fold a fitted sheet." The memory hit Vex like a psychic freight train. It wasn't just the frustration of the impossible task. It was the human capacity to persist in the face of obvious futility while simultaneously questioning their life choices and planning what to watch on television later. Vex's probe began to fracture as it encountered the final, most terrifying aspect of human consciousness, their ability to find humor in their own suffering. Jake wasn't just enduring the psychic intrusion. He was genuinely entertained by Vex's confusion. "This is actually pretty cool." Jake's thoughts bubbled with amusement. "I always wondered what it would be like to have someone else in my head. It's like having a really invasive roommate who can't figure out how the remote control works." And that's when Vex made his fatal mistake. In a desperate attempt to understand this impossible species, he pushed deeper than he'd ever gone before, reaching for the absolute core of Jake's being. What he found there was something that would haunt him for the rest of his considerably shortened life. At the center of Jake's consciousness, in the place where every other species kept their fundamental sense of self, it was something that could only be described as controlled madness. It was the human capacity to know with absolute certainty that existence was random and meaningless and terrifying, and to respond to this knowledge by making jokes about it. Jake's core consciousness wasn't fear or anger or despair. It was the uniquely human ability to look into the abyss of an uncaring universe and say, "Well, this might as well happen." The sheer audacity of it broke something fundamental in Vex's mind. The psychic feedback hit Vex like a supernova exploding directly inside his skull. His tentacles went rigid. His eyes rolled back, and a sound escaped his throat that his species had no word for, because they'd never experienced anything horrible enough to require it. Jake's mind wasn't just chaotic, it was contagiously chaotic. The human's mental patterns were spreading through Vex's probe like a virus, infecting his own thought processes with their impossible logic. "Oh no," Jake said, his voice suddenly filled with genuine concern as he noticed Vex's distress. "Are you okay? You look like you just tried to divide by zero, and somehow impossibly." That comment made perfect sense to Vex now. His probe was caught in Jake's mental gravitational field, and he was beginning to think in human patterns. This was beyond catastrophic. This was unprecedented. This was actually kind of funny, Vex heard himself say, and the words horrified him more than anything he'd ever experienced. See? You're getting it. Jake exclaimed with delight. Welcome to the human experience, buddy. Population. Everyone who's ever wondered why we park in driveways and drive on parkways. Vex tried to withdraw his probe, but it was too late. Jake's consciousness had wrapped around it like psychological quicksand. Every attempt to pull back only dragged him deeper into the maze of human thought. Let me go, Vex gasped, his voice breaking with panic. I need to get out of your mind. Can't do that now, Jake said apologetically. You're stuck in here with me. But hey, look on the bright side. You're about to learn why humans conquered half the galaxy by accident. By accident? Vex's confusion was tinged with growing horror. Oh yeah, Jake's mental voice took on the tone of someone sharing a fascinating fact. We never meant to be a galactic power. We just kept bumping into things and somehow coming out on top. It's like cosmic slapstick comedy, except with more explosions and diplomatic incidents. Vex's probe was now completely entangled in Jake's stream of consciousness, and he was beginning to experience human memory as if it were his own. He saw flashes of human history, a species that had somehow survived ice ages, plagues, world wars, and reality television. Your species should have gone extinct 1,000 times over, Vex whispered, overwhelmed by the sheer improbability of human survival. Tell me about it. Jake agreed cheerfully. We invented nuclear weapons and then spent 50 years playing cosmic chicken with them. We created artificial intelligence and immediately started worrying it would turn evil. We discovered we were destroying our own planet and responded by making memes about it. Survival isn't our strong suit. But persistence? We've got that in spades. The memories kept flooding through Vex's probe, humans sending messages into space hoping aliens would find them, then making movies about those same aliens being hostile. Humans creating social networks to connect with each other, then using them primarily to argue about trivial matters. Humans developing space travel specifically so they could plant flags on things. This is madness, Vex moaned, his mental voice echoing strangely in Jake's consciousness. Yep, Jake confirmed with disturbing satisfaction. But it's functional madness. We're like the universe's favorite broken toy that somehow keeps working better than the fancy stuff. And then Vex encountered something that made his probe seize up entirely. Jake's complete knowledge of human popular culture. It wasn't just entertainment. It was a collective fever dream that somehow helped humans process reality. Jake's mind contained the plots of thousands of movies, most of which involved humans defeating impossible odds through clever thinking, dumb luck, or the power of friendship. There were books about teenagers fighting dystopian governments, songs about dancing being illegal, and television shows where people competed to eat bugs for money. How do you function with all this noise in your heads? Vex demanded, his psychic sensors overloading from the sheer volume of irrelevant information. That's the secret, Jake said, his mental voice suddenly taking on an ominous quality. We don't function. We improvise. We make it up as we go along. We treat the entire universe like it's one big cosmic joke, and somehow that makes us incredibly dangerous. Vex's probe stumbled into Jake's memories of human warfare, and what he found there made him understand why his species had been so careful about direct confrontation with Earth. Humans didn't just fight wars. They got creative about it. They turned cooking utensils into weapons. They used psychological warfare that involved playing music so annoying it drove enemies away. They invented strategies based on cartoon characters and named their military operations after breakfast cereals. We once won a battle because someone tricked the enemy into thinking we had a giant inflatable tank army, Jake shared helpfully. Another time, we ended a siege by launching dead cows with catapults because we thought it would be demoralizing. Spoiler alert. It was, but the truly terrifying thing wasn't human unpredictability. It was their capacity for what Jake's mind labeled as weaponized optimism. Humans genuinely believed they could solve any problem if they just thought about it hard enough, and maybe tried turning it off and on again. Your species defeated the Cronarg Empire using nothing but knock-knock jokes, Vex realized, his probe accessing Jake's knowledge of recent galactic history. To be fair, they were really good knock-knock jokes, Jake replied. Plus, the Cronarch had never encountered humor before. They literally couldn't process it. Their entire tactical database crashed when Commander Sarah Martinez asked them if their refrigerator was running. Vex's tentacles were now twitching uncontrollably as he experienced more human memories. The time humans had solved a diplomatic crisis by teaching aliens to play poker. The incident where they prevented a war by accidentally inventing a new dance craze. The legendary moment when they defeated an invasion fleet by broadcasting every television commercial from the 1980s simultaneously. "You're all insane," Vex whispered. But there was something approaching admiration in his voice. "Clinically, probably." Jake agreed. But we're also the species that looked at the concept of impossible and decided it was more of a suggestion than a rule. We've been proving experts wrong for millennia. They said we couldn't fly, so we invented airplanes. They said we couldn't reach the moon, so we went there and played golf. They said we couldn't survive first contact with aliens, so we turned it into a diplomatic barbecue. Vex's probe was now completely saturated with human consciousness, and he was beginning to understand something that chilled him to his core. Humans weren't just resistant to psychic control because their minds were chaotic. They were resistant because chaos was their natural state, and they'd learned to thrive in it. Every other species seeks order, Vex realized, his voice filled with dawning horror. But you seek chaos. You create it, you weaponize it. Now you're getting it, Jake said with evident pride. We're entropy with opposable thumbs. We're the universe's way of keeping things interesting. We're what happens when evolution gets bored and decides to experiment. The final piece of the puzzle clicked into place as Vex's probe encountered Jake's deep knowledge of human philosophy. Humans had spent centuries asking questions that had no answers, then writing books about why the questions were more important than the answers. They'd created art about suffering and called it beautiful. They'd turned confusion into entertainment and uncertainty into adventure. You've turned existential dread into a lifestyle choice, Vex gasped. Pretty much, Jake confirmed. We figured out that if nothing matters, then everything matters exactly as much as we decide it does. So we decided pizza matters. And friendship, and whether or not that dress was blue or gold. Again, we take meaningless things seriously and serious things lightly, and somehow that works for us. X's probe was dissolving now, not from damage but from exposure to pure human consciousness. He was losing his own identity, becoming something hybrid and strange, part alien logic, part human chaos, entirely confused. "Please," he begged, his mental voice fragmenting. "I can't take any more. Your mind is breaking mine." "Sorry about that," Jake said with genuine sympathy. "But look at it this way. You're about to become the first member of your species to truly understand humans. That's got to be worth something, right?" But Vex wasn't listening anymore. He was too busy experiencing the final, most devastating aspect of human consciousness, their unshakable belief that everything would somehow work out in the end, despite all evidence to the contrary. It was this belief that had carried them through ice ages and world wars, through plagues and disasters, through every impossible challenge the universe had thrown at them. They called it hope. But it was really just stubbornness disguised as optimism. "We don't give up," Jake's voice echoed through Vex's collapsing consciousness. "We can't give up. It's not in our programming. We're the species that looked at extinction and said not today so many times that extinction got tired and went to bother someone else." Vex's probe finally shattered completely. But instead of returning to his own mind, he found himself trapped in the space between thoughts, experiencing reality through human perception. Colors were brighter, sounds were funnier, and everything seemed simultaneously more important and less serious than it had before. "What have you done to me?" he whispered. "Given you a gift," Jake replied, his mental voice now coming from everywhere and nowhere. You wanted to understand human consciousness. Now you do. Welcome to the club, buddy. Population. Everyone who's ever wondered if mayonnaise is an instrument. And in that moment, Vex understood with crystal clarity why humans had conquered half the galaxy. It wasn't through superior technology or military might. It was through sheer, unrelenting weirdness that made every other species either laugh, cry, or run away screaming. They were contagious. Their chaos spread to everything they touched, turning order into friendly anarchy and making the impossible seem routine. They were the universe's practical joke on itself, and the punchline was that the joke worked. Vex's last coherent thought as his alien consciousness finally succumbed to human logic was a revelation that would have terrified his species if he'd been able to communicate it. Humans weren't just resistant to psychic control. They were psychic black holes, absorbing and transforming any consciousness that touched theirs. They didn't just survive first contact with telepathic species, they converted them. And as Jake's laughter echoed through the remains of Vex's sanity, the former alien interrogator realized with dawning horror and inexplicable joy that he was now part of the most successful invasion force in galactic history. An invasion force that conquered not through violence, but through the sheer infectious power of human weirdness. "Welcome to Earth Logic," Jake said cheerfully as Vex's consciousness finally merged completely with human thought patterns. "Please keep your arms and tentacles inside the ride at all times, and remember, if you're not confused, you're not paying attention." And somewhere in the depths of space, on a dozen different worlds, other alien telepaths suddenly found themselves inexplicably craving something called pizza and wondering why humans put pineapple on it. The invasion had begun. Not with weapons or warfare, but with knock-knock jokes and the unshakable human belief that everything was simultaneously hilarious and meaningful. And the truly terrifying part, it was working.